talk about is a very critical aspect. Last time when we spoke about values, beliefs, morals and ethics and attitude, and we talked about it and we said there is really no universality when it comes to values, beliefs, morals, ethics, and attitude. It's heavily dependent in terms of our culture, the education, societal upbringing. It's a human constructed item. I mean, where any value, any belief is entirely human constructed, and therefore these things vary heavily across cultures, across socioeconomic backgrounds, across cultural backgrounds, and so on, and experiences. And all these things are very, very different. Now, the next thing we did speak about, so let me get to some of those things. So today's session, we will talk about what is called perception and mindfulness. Yeah, you can see the slides, right, Aditi?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So this is where we really started. We really started by saying that if in our leadership positions in various schools, if we have to go on to become a really high quality, flexible leader, what does it take is our flexibility in terms of our cognition, not just sitting on status quo, but rather our ability to imagine the future, our ability to come up with really good stretch goals, which are difficult to achieve, but they are inspirational goals, and it will energize the whole team. And then be able to develop a path forward in terms of how to reach that goal. Those are the parts to do with cognition and vision. And then emotionally, it's about communication, listening, a key part, almost as important as communication, if not more important, and empathy. And dispositionally, optimism, something where when people come in touch with us, and after 15, 20 minutes of interacting with us, they go back with the energy level which is higher than they came in with. That is really what this thing of energy is all about. I wanted to add that one line to energy as to what energy really means. There are some people in our relationship where we go and engage with the person for 50, 20 minutes, and after that we come out more drained than when we went inside that particular discussion. When our energy level gets elevated is what we talk about as energy in terms of disposition. And it's not just the energy we show, it is a combination of our compassion, the empathy, our communication, all of that, which leads to a higher degree of energy in people when they leave that particular interaction and that particular transaction with us. Value beliefs, we said the first thing is it's not even that important we fully understand what our beliefs, morals, and values and attitudes are, but it is quite important that we understand there is really no universality to the whole thing. Okay, there is very little universality to the whole thing. We can just say extremely simple ones like going and killing another fellow human being or a wild animal or whatever it is might be things which we might think of as saying definitely all of us should value that as one of the things. We should not do that, or one of the morals, one of the ethics we all follow. But other than that, there is really no universality to it. A large part of it is really shaped by the socio-economic, emotional, experiential, educational conditioning which we have all gone through. Okay, we won't realize that because the thing is, these things are so subtle and so beneath the surface. It takes a lot of effort to go down and down and down and down to even understand that we have these kinds of values and beliefs and morals with which we are judging others, and we are creating dissonance, whether it is to do with our family, with our colleagues, or with any other social interaction which we engage in. The first step to really be solving for ourselves is the recognition and the realization that there is no universality. Just the sheer fact makes a very profound change in ourselves, because we start accepting other people for what they are. We start accepting situations for what it is, and we start accepting various things which are happening around us. That doesn't mean we accept it against our beliefs. We start understanding what that might be, and our expectations from other people also start coming down. So the focus really gets redirected to self. And that is really what Yogakshema is about, isn't it? I mean, as far as Yogakshema is about, our job is not to try and find out how do I change the other person? How do I change my colleague? How do I change my family? How do I change my society? How do I change my children? None of those things. In that particular context, what is that I can do as an individual, as a person? What is that I can do? What is the change I can do to myself to have a higher quality of life and a greater inner quality of life, a better inner quality of life? Of course, it doesn't mean that we accept everything and expect nothing. What we are saying is we have to be able to draw the line between what is that thing which is inevitable. When we say pain is inevitable and suffering is optional, what is that part which is inevitable? What is the part which we just need to accept? What is the part which calls for our serenity? And there are parts where we have to act. There are parts where we need the courage. There are parts which is optional, and those are your action parts. And wisdom is the most critical line, which is what serenity prayer says. Grant me the serenity to accept things I can't change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right? And how do we do that? We already know this part of it, that we have an automatic part of our brain, which is the lower center, which is the seat of all our emotions, the seat of automatic thoughts, which is unthinking, because it's just so deep inside the lower center that everything which comes out of it is reactive, emotional, and unthinking. But we are all endowed with this beautiful newer brain which sits on top, which is the part where our higher center is. And that higher center is the one which takes deliberate thoughts, deliberate action, whether it is compassion, communication, and all kinds of leadership qualities come out of our higher center. And if you're able to put all those together and we say, this is what neurosculpting is all about, what is it? It is using that important concept called neuroplasticity, that our brain can continue to change and evolve all the way till the day of our death, and to slowly chip away like a sculptor, taking away the unwanted parts. What do we chip away? We keep chipping away the unwanted parts and forming new connections, forming new circuitry, thereby slowly sculpting a new brain and embarking on the journey to evolve from the current me to a happier and a more fulfilled and a more purposeful me. And that is the process which we call as evolve. And that is a process which is empowering, because we are doing the action on ourselves to have a better life, rather than looking outside and waiting for somebody else to change it for us. So today's didactic is really going to be on reality, sensing, perception, and mindfulness. All right. So that is what we are going to be spending our time on. The first 25 minutes we will spend on this. Now, there is something which is out there. All right. There is something which is written there. And then how do we look at any reality? This is a reality which is out there. That little picture, let's call it the reality. The first thing we do is we soak in that reality through one of our five senses. We either see it, or we hear somebody say something, or we smell something, or we taste something, or we feel something. Not feeling in an emotional sense, feeling in a sense physically touching and feeling, right? Or somebody touching or be touching something. So we soak in through our five senses. There is really no other way to take in the reality. It has to come through one of these five senses. There is no other way. If you're completely shut in terms of our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and touch, there is no way of sensing what is really going on to be able to sense. Once we have done that, we put it through our filters. What are these filters? Our values, our experiences, our beliefs, our understanding. We interpret it because what is coming is some kind of raw data. Raw data itself is of no use when it comes to our mind. The raw data needs to be processed, and it will get processed based on the kind of neural circuitry we have kept for ourselves, and it gets processed through that and comes out as some kind of an essence, which could be a story of some kind. Story not in a fiction story in the sense our understanding, our interpretation of the whole thing. And that is what we call as perception. All right. And we could perceive it very, very differently. Okay. Two people can look at the same reality, which is out here, and they can perceive it very differently, where one person thinks it's a 9 and the other person thinks it's a 6. And neither of them, the most important thing to understand is neither of them is particularly wrong. It is just that the way they sensed it, the way they interpreted, the way they built the story is what led them to believe one was seeing the number 6 lying on the ground and one was seeing the number 9, and both of them are absolutely right in whatever they are seeing. Right? So every one of us, this is a small example, but every one of our lives of interaction is a bit like this. There is a reality, we take it through our sense organs, we interpret it through our experiences, our values, beliefs, and morals and ethics, and all kinds of thought process which we have. And then we build our own story and say, this is what the reality is. If you just observe this picture, you can see these little circles are moving. Can you see some of these circles are beginning to move? If you just focus on one circle, it feels like some other circles are moving and so on. The reality is nothing is moving here. It is a static image. Whether you believe it or not, you can copy this and put it on a screen. It's a completely static image which we have. Second, you see that beautiful sea? Can any of you see a baby here?
Yes, sir. I can see like babies lying that the tree below the tree.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Sir, you can see.
You can see, yeah. So where's the baby? So sometimes we find it very difficult to see things from a distance. When we are very close to the action, we find it difficult to see it from a distance. Here, we mean it literally. You actually move your chair back and you can see the baby, which is a big baby, which is lying there. Which is covered by the tree and everything else, and the big baby, which is their inability to see things from a distance. All right. That's the second thing when it comes to perception. The third thing about perception is this. Can you see an inverted triangle, a white inverted triangle?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
And it's
sir.
really not there, isn't it? We can all see that triangle when there is really no triangle there at all, but we can see it. So where we can perceive things when none exist. I mean, these are simple examples. So don't take these things literally. The example of the baby or the example of the circles or the example of the inverted triangle. It is to make us understand that in the real world, while it might be hard for us to figure out and understand that it indeed is the case, in the real world, we do perceive these kinds of things in various social interactions we have. We perceive, we read meaning into what people say when they don't mean to say that at all. We interpret what somebody is saying in a certain way when they mean it in a completely different way. There are all kinds of things. The perceptual differences is what leads to a lot of interpersonal friction as well. And by the way, this kind of thing is not just a bunch of visual paradoxes or visual, things where you see something when something is not there and so on. It is also auditory. I'm going to play a very tiny audio piece. How do I new share, and I say share computer sound? Yeah. I'm just going to play a small audio sound. I want you to tell me what you hear. Just one word is all you have to say, and you can put it in your chat box.
Laurel, 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 laurel.
Let's go to the chat box and take a look. Yanni, okay. Yeah, okay. Yanni, you're all okay. Yellow, okay. The sound they're making is either Yanni or Laurel. Did anybody hear Laurel? Laurel, okay. God bless you, Shweta. Finally.
Thank you.
Because if none of you said Laurel, then I won't have the next slide to present at all. Because there you go. There are more people who say that they heard Laurel. You won't believe it. Okay? You won't believe it. Two completely different sounds. One of them is Yanni, Y-A-N-N-Y, Yanni. The other one is the word laurel, L-A-U-R-E-L. And in this little sound piece, there are actually 50% people who hear laurel, and there are 50% people who hear Yanni. And I, by the way, hear laurel. Okay, I can't hear Yanni for the life of me. I've tried it at least 100 times. I put it on, I've done it with headsets, I've removed headsets, I put it on full speaker. I've tried to hear just the word Yanni, Yanni, Yanni somewhere else, came back to listen to it to see whether I can hear the Yanni. I can't for the life of me. That's how difficult it is sometimes for us to perceive things. All right. So now there are many masks which there are many filters which mask our perception. Okay. Some of the things we saw, one of them is our values, what is important to us, and somebody else, it might not be all that important, and there is a dissonance which gets created. Or what we think to be right, what we believe to be the right action, our ethics, our experiences, all of these things which we saw could be very, very different when other people have gone through those experiences as compared to us. And we might have some firm ideas about all these things. In such cases, just remember one thing, there is really no universality to it. And people go through very many different experiences, and it is not necessary. They value, they believe, and they have the ethics and the morals and experiences as you, exactly in the same way. They might have, it doesn't mean they have lesser morals or more morals or lesser ethics or more ethics. It's just that they have a different set of values, beliefs, morals, ethics, and experiences. And we will talk about more filters as we go, which is our mindset, which is our biases. And in the next session, in the new year 2021, we will talk about a very important concept called automatic negative thoughts. What those are, what are the kinds of thoughts, what is the antidote for it, all of that we will talk about when we come back in 2021. Let's press on and see what this perception cycle is all about. The perception cycle is like this. There is a reality which is out there. And then we soak in that reality through our senses, process it through our filters and masks, and then we create a perception. Now we believe, okay, this perception, by the way, is our truth. Our understanding of the reality is our perception. But we somewhere in our brain make that approximation and start thinking this truth is indeed a fact. It is our interpretation of that particular truth, just the same way as somebody looked at it and said it's a 6, or somebody looked at it and said it's a 9. It's our understanding of the truth or the reality, and that perception, our truth, slowly becomes a fact in our head. And therefore, we store it as an experience and put it away in our memory. When we look at a new reality, we start interpreting that reality from this understanding of my truth, which has slowly become a fact. We have to understand what I have in my brain is just my truth. Somebody else will be having their truth about the same thing. They will have their beliefs. They will have their own ethics. They will have their own experiences, why they are acting in a certain way. This is a perception cycle, and this kind of a cycle can be a very tough cycle to break if we start interpreting every reality and our truth keeps getting converted to a fact. A fact is an objective reality. A truth is a subjective reality, right? So if we start thinking of every one of my truth as a fact, it's a problem. We need to break that perception cycle. How do we break a perception cycle? There are really only two ways to do it. We can either change our perception, or when we can be more focused in terms of how we take the reality in through our senses. So that we are really, when we are smelling something, we are truly smelling something. When we are seeing something, we are truly taking in the 100% of what is going on. And there are ways to do it. And that's where we come to the tools of this didactic. What are the ways to do it? Now, the first thing is we have to change perception. For changing perception, Wayne Dyer says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That's got nothing to do with, let's say I look at this red pen or whatever, this blue bottle. And then if I show this blue bottle to everybody, all of you will see it as a light blue bottle. That is not going to change. But when we hear something, when somebody is trying to say something, when we are listening to it, when we are taking it through our senses, the way we are interpreting it, if you're able to change the way we are interpreting, change the way we are able to look at things, change the way we are hearing things, change the way we are smelling things. If you're able to change that, our perception itself will change. We can make a much better perception of that same reality by just changing the way we perceive things, the way we look at things. I'll give you a couple of examples. We all go through this, okay? Her behavior is unreasonable. This kid is never attentive in class. This kid is a bully. My management never sees my point. Absolutely fine. Absolutely common issues. Behavior is unreasonable. Some other colleague or the kid is never attentive in class. But what do we change the perception to? We change the perception to just looking at what is that the other person's experience, what is that they are going through, which is making them do that. Her behavior is unreasonable. Rather change it to saying, what probably is making the person unreasonable? Or am I being unreasonable? Or am I being too touchy? That is where we change the way we look at things. This kid is never attentive in class. There are kids who come and sleep in class. Is it that the kid is not finding it interesting? Or am I not teaching it in an interesting way? Or is there something else? Maybe the kid is doing a lot of work at home. She is helping out her mother or grandmother at home. I had a kid in my class in a village I was teaching. I later found out that child is staying with a grandmother, and the grandmother doesn't have a domestic help. And this kid used to work all the way up to 10:30 in the night, washing dishes and everything else, and used to come to school. Likita is her name. And then later we found out what that thing is. And then we can slowly try and address a problem like that. If I just think of it as saying, this Likita, she will never change. She's like this. She will come to class and start sleeping. And then I won't have an answer at all for it. But if I'm able to just change the perception, what might be making the child a bully? If my management is not listening to me, is it just that they don't want to listen? That's unlikely, isn't it? I mean, everybody is reasonably reasonable. What are their priorities, which is probably making them not listen to me on certain things? Okay, so breaking the cycle, changing the perception is really about developing a particular way of thinking. It is about what may be the cause. Why is it like this? Asking those questions, asking 1-2 levels beyond what hits the eye. Okay, changing our perception definitely increases our empathy and our ability to understand other people. And it also reduces the way we will blame something. Rather than saying our management is at fault, we will say maybe they have a different set of priorities. Let me try and understand what those priorities might be. Then I'm really working towards a solution. I'm not pointing a finger at somebody. Now, can you put it down on the chat box very quickly in terms of what do you see in this picture? Don't say a deer. I want you to just write it in a few words. What do you see in this picture? What is your understanding of this picture? Shadow tree. I want to know what is the deer, what is happening with the deer part of it. A running deer, okay. A deer is running, crossing the road, hungry, okay. All right. See, most of us, thank you. So most of us really see it as a deer which is crossing the road. Okay. A change perception, which I said, is always very difficult. All right. Because these are deeply embedded things in us. It takes a lot of effort to go deeper and deeper and be very honest with ourselves to be able to go deeper, to understand the surface of our beliefs and values and everything else. All right. Here, what really is it? Is it a deer which is crossing the road? Or is it a road which is crossing the forest? I'm sure the second one doesn't come naturally to any of us. Because you know why? We see it from a human view. If you ask the deer what is going on, I'm sure the deer would have said, there is a road which is crossing my home. All right. So that is really what changing perception is all about. Changing the way we look at things, and the things we look at will slowly begin to change. Okay. And there is a way to practice these things. Like we said, start asking one more question beyond the obvious of saying the management is not seeing my problem, beyond the obvious of saying this child is a bully, beyond the obvious of saying this child is always sleeping in my class, beyond the obvious of saying she's obnoxious. Try and ask the question, what is making her not cooperate with me? What is making the child unattentive and sleepy in my class? And so on and so forth. The second one is this whole concept called mindfulness. There's plenty which is said and written and spoken about this buzzword called mindfulness. Honestly, it's not a very difficult thing. It's difficult to practice. It's a bit like that neurosculpting, like we say, that these are all fairly simple tools, but they're quite not easy to evolve. So similarly, mindfulness is not easy to practice because it calls for a lot of practice and it calls for a lot of honesty within ourselves. Now, mindfulness is simply seeing the reality for what it is. We don't judge it. We don't perceive it. We just soak it in as it is happening. There are many, many definitions for mindfulness. Some of the ways to write down mindfulness is this. You pay full attention to what is happening out there. Whatever is happening, we pay full attention to it. Okay. One of the ways to be mindful, when we are eating, then we are getting which of the sense organs are working. In eating, our tasting and our olfactory, and to some extent our auditory, are all parts of eating, and visual. Okay. Eating is pretty much a wholesome experience because we also touch. Eating is one of those rare experiences where all the five senses are involved. We touch the food, it has to feel right, it has to look right, it has to smell right, it has to taste right, and it has to have the crunch. It has to also have the softness in certain things. Therefore, it also has to have the auditory part of it as well. So similarly, when we look at a situation, to be able to soak in the reality in its fullness as much as possible. But then we don't interpret it. We don't judge it. We just take it for what it is. And to be able to do that, we have to be there at that particular moment. Okay. Two things. One, we can't be sending our processor off to the past or to our future. We cannot be contemplating what is going to happen in the future. We cannot be thinking about what happened in our past. nor can we be engaging our senses in some other activity like watching television or something else, then it is impossible to be mindfulness. That doesn't mean if I switch off the television and I'm in the present moment, then I'm always mindful, not necessary, but if you're able to bring it all together to the present moment, if you're able to open out our senses, and if you're able to not judge that particular situation, then we can practice mindfulness. It's actually not that difficult to practice mindfulness. Like I said, there's so much is written and spoken about this particular thing. It almost sounds like some great concept. It is, but it's actually fairly straightforward. We'll break it down into two parts. Okay. The first part is what we will say is there are times where you act and there is no reaction back. Okay, there is no interaction. It is not interpersonal or where you're engaging with a society or anything like that, where there is action. Let's talk about some action. Walking. Okay, when we walk, okay, then we should try and just walk. In the sense, we are fully aware of what is happening to our body, what is happening to our legs, what is happening to our muscles, how are we smelling the air, what are we seeing, all of those things, which is there in the process of walking. Or when we are just brushing our teeth, right? To be fully focused in that present moment. When you're brushing our teeth, we are not thinking about whether the milk has already boiled over or whether this particular thing has to be sent, this particular assignment has to be completed. No, we are just brushing our teeth. Or it could be showering, it could be cooking, reading, whatever it is. It is providing the 100% CPU, which is our brain, to that particular activity in the present moment with no other distraction, where all our five senses are engaged in that particular activity. Now, this is relatively easy to practice. All right. It's not difficult at all. We just have to make it. Okay. One easy way is to connect our brain and our body is to take one long breath. 3 breaths is ideal, but even if you're able to take one long breath where we close our eyes and take one good breath. So whenever we get distracted, take one good breath. So when we are fully aware of the breath, then immediately our mind and body gets connected, and then we can immediately be mindful. Okay. When we are eating, take that one breath, say that one tiny prayer, whatever that prayer might be. It could be thanking the farmer, it could be thanking some God or thanking whoever, the person who cooked it or whatever it is. Just that's one small thing. And then we get into the process of eating where we can be mindful when we are eating or when we are brushing or any of those things. Then there is, as we practice this, then when we come to the interactions, which is with our families, with our kids, our societies and colleagues, then we can slowly get more and more mindful. And being mindful and being attentive and being listening is an important aspect of leadership, because listening and empathy can really grow if you're mindful and if you're able to see the way we look at things. If we change the way we look at things, we look at things very differently, like Wayne Dyer said, that creates empathy, an important part to flexible leadership. When we are able to hear what the others are saying fully and we are listening, we are actually seeing them. Okay, we are fully seeing them and listening to them and everything else. It improves our listening. That's again an important part of leadership, in flexible leadership. So perceiving better and being mindful are really the 2 parts to the didactic today. And today, if there are any questions, I will take it now. And we will have a case which is presented by Bhavna ma'am, who will present the case for us. Then we can have a good discussion around it. As she is presenting the case, my request would be that if we need any clarifying questions, so we will say that our interaction will be in 2 parts. The first 5-10 minutes, as she presents, after she presents the case, we will ask her for some clarifications if we have any about her case. And then we come to saying, have I either undergone an experience of that particular nature, and what are the solutions I might have for Bhavna to be able to solve the problem, and for us to be able to relate to her issue as well. Yeah. So if there are any questions, I will take it now. Otherwise, we can go straight into Bhavna.
when we say about action,
Yeah.
and we just need to be present there, and we just need to be brushing or washing or cooking, whatever, then what exactly is multitasking?
Multitasking is, Lalita ma'am, it's a bit of a farce. The current, at least our current understanding, is that the brain is really incapable of multitasking. So what it does is it slices. I'm sure Ushanti will be able to add better value to what I'm saying, but I'll say what I have to say, and I'll ask Ushanti to. So the brain kind of keeps moving between one and the other. It does this and does that and does this, but at any point in time, it can only focus on one thing and then it quickly goes. So multitasking is actually a fairly stressful activity, and multitasking has been found to be not really possible at all in any meaningful way. There are some types of multitasking, Daniel Kahneman argues, is possible where you're engaging completely different parts of the brain. So when you're driving back home, he calls what is called a system one, which we call as lower center. System one is engaged, so which is pretty much automatic when you're driving. At that point in time, you could be engaged in an activity which is cerebral or which is more higher center activity as well. That is somewhat possible, but multitasking is found to be, I will look up an article and send it to you. Multitasking is not found to be a scientifically proven thing, as far as I know.
So what we believe that we've been multitasking is not multitasking. We're just doing multi-actions.
Multi-actions, yeah.
Multi-actions.
Yeah. We're just moving from one to the other very rapidly, and that's about it.
And not able to complete any action.
That depends on our efficiency and experience in each of those activities. In some cases, I mean, I think I mentioned I love to cook, and I can have 3 gas stoves, and I can quite comfortably move between 3 or 4 gas stoves because I kind of have a laid out process and I keep moving between the other in a certain way. But that's only a brain's way of processing it.
Multi-action.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You want to add a point, Andy, on multitasking, or would you like to take it up right at the end? Or
Sure. Both of you, what you said and understood is just right. To make it simple, the key word is focusing. Whenever we are focusing, it is our higher center of the brain or the conscious mind that we are using. So whenever we are using the higher center of the brain, or consciously, effortfully, willfully, when we are doing things, we can only do one thing at a time. And as Ramesh rightly said, yes, we can be consciously doing something, but automatically and mechanically doing something else. And as Lalita correctly said, it is not multitasking, but doing few things, multi-actions. That's a nice way of putting it in. So one is mechanical, and the other, only one thing can be focused at a time. If we understand it that way, then things become clear.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Yeah. See, I thought it's a very simple way to say, suppose somebody is writing a letter or something, and at the same time listening to music. So we can say that if it is 1 minute that that person is engaged in both the activities, it could only be 30 minutes of writing, 30 minutes of music, or 40, 20, or whatever. It can never be 60 minutes of writing and 60 minutes of music. Thank you.
But the neatest thing is the brain is capable of switching really, really quickly in microseconds. And as you rightly said, Lalita, only people who have trained themselves, they'll be able to do. Otherwise, our focus is fragmented. So it's always better these days, what we say is to know one-pointedness and to keep doing one thing at a time for a length of that time. Not just like when we use the social media, within seconds we switch from one to another. Even there we are focusing, but that is very short periods of time. That won't help in improving our concentration a lot. So focusing on one thing for a length of time is how we can actually improve our focus, our concentration. And if that extends, that is how we can be in quote unquote flow, as Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi, one of the positive psychologists, calls that as flow that we get into.
Can I share something here?
Yes, Aditi. On before you go, in fact, the flow is one full session. We are going to be focusing on just what Andy was talking about. Such an important concept. We are almost going to be focusing one full session on Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's concept called a flow. What is it? How do we get into flow as individuals? Aditi, yours.
Very interesting topic today. I just remembered something reading in some of the that the video games which are made, they have some sort of a music playing, and there is a scientific fact, studies going on which say that such kind of music enhances your concentration while playing. So and then today we discussed about it, saying that if we are listening to music while we are doing some things, probably in between some point of time we are switching our concentration between music and the work. So which one is correct? Like, are we playing video games while listening to music, or which one would be the right thing to say?
I'll take it up, Ramesh.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is no right or wrong here, Aditi. And it is true with some people. It could be, we have no idea how that enhances either the concentration or the memory power. Some people are auditory, then either through law of association or through various different interconnections in the brain, the networking capability will enhance either the concentration or the memory with some people, especially the younger generation, Generation Z, and also the millennials for that matter. They're so used to listening to music with whatever they're doing, either studying, homework, with any other thing. For somebody like me in a totally different generation, it is flabbergasting. But some of the either kids or adults, they are able to train themselves to help out. And we know how it helps. We know very little of it as neuroscientists. There's a lot of research that is still happening in that field. But one thing is certain, one of the things is for people who love music, their neurochemistry of the brain when they listen to music is very different. Such happy chemicals will be released that itself will help in either focusing or in remembering. That is one of the ways. To show the cause and effect in a pure scientific manner, it is difficult, but they're trying to. These are many different theories how it can help. But to prove the cause and effect, we can show the correlation between the two. But there's a huge difference between showing a correlation of two things and showing the cause and effect relationship of two things.
Yeah. Thank you. So we can, I will give one tiny quote on